The restaurant's dimmed lights couldn't hide Brenda's hand slipping into another man's at table 3. My brother, sitting across from me, saw it too. A knot formed in my stomach, tight and cold, as she laughed, turning her back. He just lifted his glass, a smirk playing on his lips, and toasted, "Here's to new beginnings, Dale." Dale pulls into his driveway on a quiet Friday evening, noticing the usual but also an unsettling silence. He finds no dinner smells, no greeting from his wife, Brenda, or their daughter, Jenny. In the bedroom, he sees Brenda's little black dress and fancy lingerie laid out, a sign something is amiss. He asks Brenda where they are going, trying to maintain a normal tone. Brenda calmly states she is going out alone, not with him, and the children are with friends. She casually mentions her date will likely keep her out until morning. Brenda explains it as a one-night thing with a younger man named Larry, a way to feel attractive again. Dale warns her that if she walks out, their marriage is over. Brenda retaliates, threatening full custody, financial ruin, and turning the children against him. Dale pleads with her to cancel, to consider marriage counseling, to save their relationship. Brenda dismisses his pleas, continuing to prepare for her outing. He makes one final, desperate plea about throwing away 17 years. Brenda opens the door, steps out to a waiting car, and leaves him alone in the house. Dale collapses into a chair, overwhelmed by tears and memories of their vanished life. The silence in the house is broken only by his quiet sobs, haunted by Brenda's composed departure. The Friday evening sun cut low across the garage door as Dale pulled his Chevy into the driveway. He turned the engine off and sat for a moment, the familiar quiet of the neighborhood settling in. He expected the smell of Brenda's pot roast, maybe the sound of Jenny practicing her clarinet, but the air was still. It was too still. A cold kind of quiet that spoke of absence. He walked up the 3 concrete steps, the porch light already on, casting a yellow glow on the welcome mat. Inside, the house felt larger than usual. No clatter from the kitchen, no television murmur from the living room, just the hum of the refrigerator. He called out, "Brenda, Jenny," but only his own voice echoed back, thin and hollow. The silence that followed was a physical thing. He checked the kitchen first, then the living room. Everything was orderly, too orderly. The house held its breath. When he reached their bedroom, the sight on the bed stopped him. A little black dress, silk, not the kind she wore for dinner out with him, was spread perfectly over the duvet. Next to it, delicate lace lingerie, expensive looking, certainly not for a night in. A knot tightened in his gut, a familiar discomfort that had been a quiet companion for months, now clenching into something sharp. Brenda emerged from the bathroom, her face smooth, a practiced hand applying a final stroke of lipstick. She looked at him in the mirror, her eyes flat, unreadable. Dale cleared his throat. "Where are we going, honey?" He tried to keep his voice level, normal, but it sounded forced, even to his own ears. He felt a tremor in his hand, a dull ache starting behind his eyes. She capped the lipstick, turning to face him. Her movements were precise, unhurried, like someone arranging flowers. "We're not going anywhere, Dale. I'm going." The words hung in the air. He noticed her hair, freshly styled, shimmering under the bedroom light. "The kids are with Patty and Tom tonight. Jenny's sleeping over with Lori." She had planned this, every detail. Dale felt the knot twist tighter. Going where? He knew already deep down, but he needed her to say it. He needed the words, the plain, unadorned truth, to make it real. He watched her pick up a small, beaded purse from the dresser. "My date will probably keep me out till morning." She said it with a shrug, almost an apology in her tone, but her eyes remained cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The casualness of her delivery was more cutting than any anger. He swallowed hard. A date? With who? He knew that too, or at least he had suspicions that now felt like certainties. "Just a guy, Larry." She paused, then added, "It's a one-night thing, Dale. Just a confidence boost. To feel attractive again." She looked him over then, a quick, dismissive glance that seemed to take in his work clothes, his tired face. Her words were meant to explain, to soothe, but they cut deeper than any insult. Dale's voice hardened. "If you walk out that door tonight, Brenda, that's it. It's over. Don't think for a second I'm waiting here for you to come back." The ultimatum felt flimsy, weak, even as he said it. He watched her eyes narrow. "Don't you threaten me, Dale." Her voice was low now, a new edge to it. "I am too. If you push this, I'll take everything. Full custody, financial ruin. I'll make sure those children hate you so much they won't even speak your name. I will do everything I can to make your children hate you." The air crackled then, the quiet tension replaced by something sharp and dangerous. He stepped closer, pleading now. "Brenda, don't, please, just cancel this. We can talk, we can go to counseling. For us, for Jenny, for everything we built." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, turning back to the mirror, adjusting a stray strand of hair. She looked at her reflection, not at him. His pleas were just background noise. "You better think twice about throwing 17 years away, Brenda." His voice was hoarse, a final, desperate plea as she reached for the doorknob. His eyes burned, but he wouldn't let the tears fall. Not yet. He wouldn't give her that. She paused, her hand on the cold brass. She didn't look back. She opened the door. A faint car horn sounded from the street. She stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. The sound was barely a click, but it echoed like a gunshot in the sudden, vast emptiness of the house. He heard the muffled sound of tires on gravel, then the distant hum of a car driving away. Dale stood there for a long moment, the scent of her perfume still lingering in the air, a cruel reminder. Then, his legs giving out, he sank into the worn armchair in the corner of the room. The quiet of the house, which had been unsettling, was now a suffocating weight. The tears came then, hot and stinging, tracing paths down his cheeks. 20 years, the first date, the wedding, Jenny's birth. Every memory, every shared laugh, every quiet evening felt like it was being systematically erased, one precise, deliberate sweep at a time. The silence was deafening, broken only by his own quiet, ragged sobs. He could still see her, cool and collected, stepping out into the evening, leaving him in the wreckage. Brenda returns the next morning, attempting to appear normal, humming while she makes coffee. Dale confronts her directly, his voice flat, declaring their marriage is over. He contacts a lawyer, beginning the divorce process, feeling unprepared for the ensuing battle. Brenda, true to her word, engages in a fierce legal fight, turning their home life into a courtroom conflict. Jenny, observant, overhears a loud argument about lawyer bills and starts to understand the situation. Mark, younger and more easily influenced, is drawn into Brenda's narrative, accepting her version of events. Brenda manipulates Mark, telling him, "Your father just couldn't handle my independence, Mark. He's tearing us apart." Jenny confronts Brenda, defending Dale, which creates a deep rift between mother and daughter. The custody battle becomes increasingly hostile, with Brenda portraying Dale as emotionally unstable. Dale begins to lose ground in the legal system, finding it complex and challenging to navigate. Their former home, now a shell, is sold, with the equity distributed unfairly. Dale moves into a small, rented apartment, his savings depleted, experiencing profound solitude. Brenda gains primary custody, significantly limiting Dale's access to Mark to supervise visits. Jenny, fiercely loyal, becomes Dale's primary source of support, spending all her free time with him. Dale fully grasps the devastating reality of Brenda's earlier threats, realizing she meant every word. The next morning, the smell of coffee, not Brenda's usual weak brew, but strong, almost defiant, woke Dale. He lay in bed listening to the clatter of a mug against the counter, the faint, off-key humming from the kitchen. She was back. He heard the refrigerator door open and close, the rustle of a cereal box. She was trying to act normal. He walked into the kitchen, his posture stiff, his eyes avoiding the cheerful pattern of her apron, the one she wore when entertaining. Brenda stood by the counter, stirring her coffee, her back to him. She turned, a slight smile on her lips, as if returning from a grocery run. "Morning," she said, her voice light. Dale looked at her, his expression unyielding. "It's over, Brenda," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth or anger. "I meant what I said last night. There's no going back from this." The words hung in the air, heavy and solid. She stared back, the smile fading, replaced by a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. Disbelief, perhaps, or a calculated assessment. He called an attorney that afternoon. The office smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Sitting across from a man with tired eyes and a perfectly knotted tie, Dale felt like he was signing up for a brawl he was ill-equipped to fight. He described the last night, the years leading up to it, the casual cruelty of Brenda's departure. The lawyer nodded, making notes, his pen scratching against the legal pad. The process felt cold, bureaucratic, reducing their 17 years to a series of bullet points. Brenda, true to her word, fought. She fought for every penny, every possession, every moment with the children. The house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, became a battleground, the quiet arguments escalating into full-blown screaming matches about legal fees, about who was to blame. Dale often found himself walking away, retreating to the garage or a quiet corner of the yard, just to escape the relentless noise of her accusations. One evening, after another particularly nasty argument about lawyer bills, Dale saw Jenny's shadow on the linoleum outside the kitchen door, which had been left ajar. She was standing there, small and still, listening to the venomous words about finances and unfairness. Later, her eyes held a new, knowing look, a subtle shift that showed she was piecing together the unraveling truth. Mark, only 8, was more easily swayed. Brenda, with her calm explanations and reassuring tone, drew him into her orbit. Dale would hear her gentle voice from the living room. "Your father just couldn't handle my independence, Mark. He's tearing us apart." Her words were a soft poison, convincing Mark that Dale was the destroyer, the one who broke the family apart. Mark started to look at Dale differently, with a mixture of confusion and mild resentment. Jenny, however, was a different story. One afternoon, after overhearing Brenda again, she confronted her mother. "Dad wouldn't do this," she shouted, her voice shaking, a raw accusation. "He would never just leave us." Brenda merely sighed, an exasperated, wounded sound, but the chasm between mother and daughter had opened wide, visible and aching. Jenny retreated to her room, leaving Brenda standing alone in the hallway. The custody battle got uglier. Brenda's lawyer presented Dale as unstable, still reeling from the shock of the separation. The paperwork painted a picture of a man incapable of providing a stable home, of a father too emotionally fragile to care for his children. Dale found himself constantly on the defensive, his genuine hurt twisted into evidence of his supposed instability. He felt the ground shifting beneath him. He started losing ground. The legal system was a maze of paperwork, deadlines, and jargon he couldn't navigate as skillfully as Brenda, who seemed to have a relentless, cold precision in her attacks. His savings, once modest but secure, dwindled rapidly, consumed by legal fees. Each month another bill, another setback. The for sale sign went up in the yard, a stark white rectangle against the green lawn. The house, once full of laughter and the ordinary sounds of family life, grew quiet, then empty. They sold it, the equity split unevenly, weighted heavily in Brenda's favor. Dale watched the moving truck pull away, taking the last of their furniture, leaving behind only dust and the ghosts of memories. He moved into a small, rented apartment on the edge of town. 2 rooms, a kitchenette. It felt temporary, a waiting room for a life he didn't recognize. The solitude was a constant ache, a hollow space in his chest. His belongings, what little he had left, looked foreign in the unfamiliar space. Brenda gained primary custody of Mark. Dale's access was restricted to supervised visits, a humiliating arrangement that made him feel like a stranger in his own son's life. He saw the distance in Mark's eyes, the carefully constructed indifference. Jenny, though, became his rock. Fierce and loyal, she spent every free moment with him. She'd come over after school, her backpack heavy, and just sit, sometimes doing homework, sometimes just reading, her presence a quiet comfort in the echoing apartment. Her unwavering loyalty was a lifeline. Dale tasted the bitter truth of Brenda's threats, a cold, metallic flavor in his mouth. She hadn't been bluffing, not about the money, not about the kids, not about turning their world upside down. She had meant every single word. Life settles into a raw, new routine, with Dale's weekends with Jenny becoming his only anchor. Mark grows increasingly distant, his calls infrequent and colored by Brenda's negative opinions of Dale. Mark parrots Brenda's accusation. "Mom says you never wanted a real family, Dad," deeply wounding Dale. Jenny attempts to reconnect with Mark, but he dismisses her, having already chosen sides. Dale struggles to maintain focus at his engineering job, his mind constantly preoccupied with his shattered life. Brenda and Larry start appearing together at local events. Their public displays a fresh source of pain for Dale. Dale tries dating, but Brenda's damaging rumors circulating through town sabotage his efforts. Jenny becomes Dale's constant companion and confidant, the only one who truly understands him. Jenny declares her intention to become an engineer like her father, offering him a glimmer of hope. Dale wrestles with the profound injustice of his situation, but channels his energy into supporting Jenny's aspirations. He sees Brenda and Larry laughing together at the grocery store, a stark, painful reminder of his lost life. The fractured relationship between his children, particularly Mark's coldness, weighs heavily on him. He begins writing in a notebook, a desperate attempt to process the overwhelming chaos. Jenny's steadfast love remains his sole guide through the darkness. Life, or what was left of it, settled into a new raw routine. The days blurred, punctuated only by the clock at his engineering firm and the dread of an empty apartment. His weekends with Jenny became the only structure, the only thing that felt real and solid enough to hold them together. They were quiet weekends, often spent at the library or a park, sometimes just watching old movies, her small hand in his, a silent promise. Mark, however, grew increasingly distant. His calls were sparse, always brief, and his voice held a careful neutrality, a guarded tone that masked the words Brenda had planted. Once, during a short phone call, after a silence that stretched too long, Mark blurted out, "Mom says you never wanted a real family, Dad. She says you just wanted to work." The words were like a physical blow stinging Dale to his core, not just for the accusation, but for the echo of Brenda's voice in his son's young throat. Jenny, observing Mark's growing coldness, tried to bridge the gap. She'd mentioned Dale, suggesting activities they could all do, but Mark would just shrug, his eyes fixed on some point beyond her. He'd picked his side. He didn't want to hear it. The chasm between the siblings grew, fueled by Brenda's quiet poisoning. Dale struggled to keep his engineering job. The complex equations on his monitor, the meticulous blueprints, felt abstract, meaningless. His mind constantly circled back to the broken pieces of his life, the lost house, the dwindling savings, the hollow ache where his family used to be. He'd stare at the schematics, seeing not circuits and lines, but Brenda's cold smile, Mark's distant eyes. Brenda and Larry started showing up together at local events. The 4th of July picnic, the high school football game, even the annual church bazaar. Their presence was a fresh stab in Dale's heart. He'd catch glimpses of them, laughing, their heads close, Brenda's hand on Larry's arm. They looked so comfortable, so oblivious to the wreckage they had left in their wake. He felt a wave of nausea each time, a sickening reminder of what was taken. He tried dating, pushed by a well-meaning colleague. A few awkward dinners, forced smiles, polite conversations. But Brenda's whispers had already made their rounds. She called me a controlling SOB to old Mrs. Henderson, Dale overheard someone say at the hardware store. The story she spun, the twisted narrative of his supposed inadequacies, had permeated the small town. Every attempt to connect felt like hitting a dead end, another wall built by her deliberate words. Jenny became his shadow, his confidant, the one person who truly saw him, not through Brenda's distorted lens, but with clear, loving eyes. She'd listen quietly as he talked about his day, about his frustrations at work, about the gnawing emptiness of the apartment. She didn't offer advice, just her presence, solid and comforting. One evening, while Dale was fixing a small circuit board in his apartment, Jenny watched him, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm going to be an engineer like you, Dad," she declared, her voice firm, resolute. It was a promise wrapped in hope, a tiny flicker in the vast darkness. It was the first time in months he felt a genuine, uncomplicated surge of warmth in his chest. He grappled with the injustice of it all, the unfairness of Brenda's casual destruction and her subsequent triumph. He felt the anger, a slow burn beneath the surface, but he tried to channel it, to focus his energy on nurturing Jenny's dreams, on being the father she deserved. He knew he couldn't fight Brenda on every front, not anymore. His resources, both emotional and financial, were too depleted. He saw Brenda and Larry again at the grocery store, in the produce aisle. Larry was holding a basket, Brenda selecting avocados, her laughter echoing, light and carefree. It was a sickening reminder of the life he lost, the easy camaraderie, the mundane intimacy of shared errands. He turned his cart quickly, heading for the dairy aisle, his heart thumping against his ribs. The weight of his children's fractured relationship, Mark's coldness, felt like a physical burden, a constant pressure on his chest. He carried it everywhere, a silent, heavy stone. He started jotting down his thoughts in a worn notebook, just fragments, observations, feelings he couldn't voice aloud. A desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos, to impose some order on the unraveling of his life. The ink on the page was a tangible release. Jenny's unwavering love was the only compass pointing him forward in the dark. Her quiet presence, her innocent questions, her hopeful declaration about becoming an engineer. These were the threads that kept him from unraveling completely. 4 years pass, and Jenny excels at the state college, studying engineering, with Dale visiting her frequently. Mark attends a different, distant school, and his calls to Dale are almost non-existent. Dale finds solace and purpose by immersing himself in work and restoring old engines in his garage. Brenda and Larry live together, but a wedding never materializes, leading to local gossip. Rumors about Larry's questionable reputation, unstable jobs, and gambling habits circulate through town. Dale begins to hear discreet comments from acquaintances about Brenda's noticeable decline. Brenda occasionally calls Dale about Mark or bills, her voice polite yet hollow. Dale maintains his distance, using politeness as a barrier against lingering pain and unforgiven memories. Jenny returns home for breaks, her usual spark dimmed by observations like, "Mom always looks so tired, Dad." Dale simply acknowledges Brenda's subtle, slow unraveling from afar. He notices that former allies of Brenda now offer him understanding, sympathetic glances. A quiet sense of impending justice for Brenda's actions begins to form in his mind. He frequently observes Larry's truck parked at the local bar, while Brenda's house remains dark. The harsh prairie winds seem to subtly confirm the notion of karma, a quiet truth. 4 years slid by, as steady and relentless as the river flowing beyond town. Jenny was off at the state college, 3 hours north, making straight A's in engineering, just as she'd promised. Dale visited her often, making the drive in his old pickup, bringing her homemade cookies and quiet encouragement. He'd sit in her dorm room, listening to her talk about thermodynamics and circuits, seeing the spark in her eyes, a genuine light that had almost been extinguished in his own life. Mark was at a different school, even further away, a small liberal arts college Brenda had pushed for. His calls to Dale were almost non-existent now, a brief text message, perhaps once a month, a perfunctory exchange on birthdays. The distance, both geographical and emotional, had solidified. Dale poured himself into work, the structured world of gears and calculations, a welcome respite from the chaos of his personal life. After hours, he'd retreat to his small garage, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal. He found solace in stripping down old engines, cleaning rust, replacing worn parts, bringing dormant machines back to life. It was a tangible process, a clear problem with a clear solution, unlike the messy, unresolved problems of his own existence. Brenda and Larry were still living together, in the old house, but the wedding never happened. People talked. Dale would catch snippets at the hardware store, at the local diner. "Heard Larry spent another night at the blackjack tables," a man would say, lowering his voice. Or, "Brenda's still waiting on that ring, I guess." The gossip drifted through town like dust. Hints of Larry's reputation, his less than stable jobs, his casual gambling, his general aimlessness. Dale started hearing veiled comments from old acquaintances, the kind that weren't direct but carried weight. "Brenda doesn't seem quite herself these days, Dale," someone would say, their eyes holding a measure of concern. "Looks a little thin." Or, "She's been keeping to herself, hasn't she?" He'd just nod, offering a non-committal hum, keeping his face neutral. He didn't ask for details. He didn't want them. Brenda called him occasionally, always about Mark, or a shared bill that still needed settling, her voice polite, almost formal, but hollow, as if speaking from a great distance. Dale kept his distance too, his politeness a thin shield over years of pain, a deep-seated hurt that hadn't faded. He wouldn't forget how she had shredded their life. Jenny would come home for breaks, her usual spark still evident, but sometimes a shadow would cross her face. "Mom always looks so tired, Dad," she'd say, stirring her coffee at his small kitchen table. "And she's so quiet. Larry's always just there." Dale would simply nod, looking out his window at the barren winter landscape. He observed Brenda's subtle decline from afar, a slow, quiet unraveling that seemed to mirror the fading paint on the old farmhouse they once shared. He noticed how some folks, the ones who had initially rallied around Brenda, believing her carefully constructed narrative, now gave him knowing, sympathetic looks. A nod from Mrs. Peterson at the grocery store, a gentle touch on the arm from old Mr. Henderson at the post office. It wasn't pity, exactly, but an acknowledgement. They saw. They understood now. The thought of Brenda facing her own reckoning, a quiet justice, began to stir in him. It wasn't a triumphant feeling, not gleeful, but a deep, cold satisfaction that settled in his bones. He knew the feeling wasn't righteous, but it was honest. He saw Larry's beat-up pickup truck parked at the local bar too many nights in a row, the neon sign of the Rusty Nail casting a red glow on its dented fender. He'd drive past Brenda's house, their old home, and see the lights on his own house dark, sometimes for hours. A quiet emptiness where there used to be laughter, or at least the dull glow of a TV. The hard prairie winds seemed to whisper a quiet truth across the fields, through the skeletal branches of the cottonwood trees. A truth as old as the earth itself. What goes around often comes back around. Dale felt it in his gut, a cold certainty. One late night, Mark calls Dale, his voice shaky, admitting college is not going well and he feels lost. Mark hesitantly asked Dale, "Dad, Mom always said you were to blame for everything. Was it true?" Dale carefully, without bitterness, shares his perspective, allowing Mark to draw his own conclusions. Mark begins making regular weekend trips to Dale's small apartment, seeking comfort and clarity. Jenny, sensing a change, gently helps Mark reintegrate into their father's life, fostering a slow family healing. Brenda and Larry's relationship deteriorates into public arguments, visible to town residents. Larry's controlling nature and increasing debts severely impact Brenda's morale and finances. Brenda's stable accounting job is put at risk by Larry's reckless spending and poor decisions. Neighbors overhear their frequent shouting, witnessing Larry's disrespect and Brenda's eroding dignity. Brenda becomes withdrawn, her once confident facade cracking under stress and regret. Dale observes Brenda's downward spiral from a distance, feeling a complex mix of pity and cold satisfaction. Mark witnesses Larry publicly scream at Brenda in the town square, articulating his disapproval. Cornered, Brenda breaks down, confessing to Mark that her life with Larry is a painful mistake. Jenny and Mark, now understanding the situation, grasp the full consequences of their mother's past actions. The phone rang late one Tuesday night, jarring Dale from a light sleep. He fumbled for it on the bedside table, his heart thumping. It was Mark. His voice was shaky, thin, like a wire stretched too tight. "Dad," he started, a hesitant tremor in the word. College wasn't going well. He felt lost, adrift in a sea of textbooks and unfamiliar faces. He sounded exhausted, emotionally drained. Then after a long pause, his voice barely a whisper, Mark asked the question that had been years in the making. "Mom always said you were to blame for everything, for the divorce, for us having to mow, for her being unhappy. Was it true?" The line crackled with a fragile silence. Dale took a deep breath, pushing down the surge of old pain, the bitterness that still lurked at the edges. He chose his words carefully without an ounce of anger or self-pity. He told Mark about that Friday night, about Brenda's one-night thing, about her ultimatum. He spoke of his own pleas, his desperate attempts to save their marriage, and her casual dismissal. "I just wanted you to know my side, son," Dale said, his voice low and steady. "You deserve to know the truth. You can make your own judgment." He let the facts stand, letting Mark connect the dots himself, offering no judgment, just clarity. A week later, Mark made a surprise weekend trip home, not to Brenda's, but to Dale's small place. He arrived with a backpack and a quiet intensity in his eyes. They spent hours talking, not just about the past, but about Mark's struggles, his hopes for the future. It was slow, careful work, like mending a frayed rope, but the connection was undeniably there. Mark started making those weekend trips a regular thing, seeking answers, and more importantly, comfort. Jenny, sensing the subtle shift in Mark, the softening around his edges, gently pulled him back into their father's world. She'd invite him to their weekly movie nights, suggest they all go out for burgers. Slowly, tentatively, a semblance of family began to reform around Dale, a fragile healing. Meanwhile, Brenda and Larry's relationship became a public spectacle. Arguments in front of the grocery store, hushed tones that escalated into shouts near the town square fountain. People would stop and stare, not out of malice, but out of a morbid curiosity. The sheen had worn off, revealing the rough edges beneath. Larry's controlling nature, his quick temper, and his mounting gambling debts started to crush Brenda's spirit and her finances. Dale would hear about it at work, from colleagues who knew people who knew people. The gossip wasn't malicious now, just a statement of fact. Her once stable accounting job was jeopardized by Larry's reckless spending and bad choices. There were rumors of bounced checks, of strained conversations with her boss. Neighbors, who had once been quick to defend Brenda, now heard their shouting matches, saw Larry disrespecting Brenda in public, chipping away at her dignity, one sharp word at a time. The confident woman who had walked out on Dale was slowly, visibly shrinking. Brenda became withdrawn. The confident facade she had maintained for years began to crack, showing the lines of stress and regret etched around her eyes, in the downturn of her mouth. She looked perpetually tired, a ghost of her former self. Dale observed Brenda's downward spiral from a distance. He felt a complex mix of emotions, a flicker of pity, yes, for the woman she once was, but also a cold, hard satisfaction, a grim acknowledgement of a prophecy fulfilled. He didn't wish her ill, but he couldn't deny the sense of justice. One afternoon, Mark saw Larry scream at Brenda in the town square, right near the old war memorial. Larry's face was red, his words sharp, accusing. Mark walked over, his face grim. When Larry stormed off, Mark stood beside his mother, who was shaking. "He's no good, Mom," Mark said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He's just like you said Dad wasn't." Brenda, finally cornered, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, broke down right there in the town square. She cried, her shoulders heaving, confessing to Mark that her life with Larry was a painful mistake, a bitter error of judgment. "It wasn't what I thought it would be, Mark," she sobbed. "It wasn't anything like I thought." Jenny and Mark, now seeing the full picture, the stark reality of Brenda's choices and their severe consequences, began to grasp the true cost of their mother's past actions. They saw the wreckage, the lives splintered. Life's choices often carry a higher price than we imagine. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Mark, fully aware of Larry's detrimental influence on Brenda, moves closer to Dale, seeking solace and stability. Mark offers a heartfelt, long overdue apology to Dale, acknowledging his past mistakes. Brenda and Larry's shared life completely disintegrates, with foreclosure notices and their home falling into disrepair. Larry further isolates Brenda, causing her remaining friends to withdraw, leaving her entirely alone. Jenny returns home from her engineering job, shocked by Brenda's emaciated appearance and the squalid conditions of her living situation. Jenny confronts Brenda with a heartbroken whisper, "Mom, look at you. This isn't who you are." Brenda finally breaks down, tearfully confessing her profound unhappiness and overwhelming regrets. She admits that Larry was never the solution, and her affair was a desperate, misguided attempt to feel alive. Brenda, shattered, subtly probes Dale for potential assistance, a silent plea for help. Dale learns of Brenda's predicament through Jenny, but a strong sense of caution prevents him from fully engaging. Jenny and Mark, united in their concern, deliberate on how to help their mother. Dale reflects on the harsh reality of paying the price, viewing Brenda's suffering as a form of karmic justice. A small local newspaper article reports Larry's arrest for fraud, publicly humiliating Brenda. The complex moral implications of the situation weigh heavily on Dale, especially seeing his children's distress. Mark, now fully seeing Larry's toxic grip on Brenda, packed his bags after his second year of college, unable to endure the charade any longer. He moved back to their town, finding a small efficiency apartment a few blocks from Dale's place. He sought refuge, a quiet port in the storm of his mother's unraveling life. One evening, over a plate of Dale's grilled burgers, Mark finally looked his father in the eye. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion, a long overdue apology. "I should have listened. I should have known." It wasn't just about Larry, but about the years of silent accusation, the acceptance of Brenda's narrative. Dale just nodded, a hand on his son's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement that the words even years later meant something. Brenda and Larry's shared life unraveled completely. Foreclosure notices, stark white paper tacked to the front door, were a common sight. The once immaculate house went to seed, the lawn overgrown, the paint peeling. Larry's car was less frequently in the driveway, and when it was often late at night. The easy camaraderie of their early days had evaporated, leaving only resentment and a hollow silence. Larry isolated Brenda further. Her few remaining friends, tired of the drama, the borrowing, the excuses, faded away one by one. Brenda was left utterly alone, navigating the wreckage of her choices with no one to lean on. Jenny returned home from her engineering job in the city for a long weekend, planning to visit both Dale and Brenda. She stopped at Brenda's first. She was horrified by Brenda's gaunt appearance, the dark circles under her eyes, and the squalor of her living situation. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, laundry overflowing baskets, a faint smell of neglect permeating the air. "Mom, look at you," Jenny whispered, her voice cracking, heartbroken. She gestured around the dim living room. "This isn't who you are. This isn't how you live." Brenda finally broke. The dam she had carefully constructed over years of denial and false bravado burst. Tears streamed down her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She confessed her deep unhappiness, the crushing weight of her regrets. "I made such a terrible mistake, Jenny," she wailed, her voice raw. "A terrible, terrible mistake." She admitted Larry was never the answer, that the affair, the reckless abandonment of her family, was a desperate, misguided attempt to feel something, anything, besides the quiet ennui of her life with Dale. It was a cry for validation, a misguided search for excitement that had cost her everything. Brenda, broken and small, looked up at Jenny, her eyes holding a silent, subtle plea. Does your father?" This words hung unfinished, a desperate hope for rescue, a fragile question about whether Dale, the man she had so cruelly cast aside, would offer any help. Jenny relayed Brenda's plight to Dale that evening, her own voice heavy with sorrow. Dale listened, his face impassive. A wall of caution remained around his heart, remembering the past, the brutal efficiency with which Brenda had dismantled their life. He felt the old pain stir, a dull throb in his chest. He heard the plea, but the memory of her threats, of her casual dismissal, was too fresh. Jenny and Mark, united in their concern, sat at Dale's kitchen table, grappling with the question that hung heavy in the air. "What do we do for Mom?" They argued, debated, their voices low, their frustration evident. They loved her, despite everything, but they were also the ones who had suffered the most from her decisions. Dale reflected on the concept of paying the price. He saw Brenda's misery, her complete isolation, her shattered dignity, not as vengeance, but as a harsh, unyielding form of justice. What she had sown, she was now reaping, in stark, undeniable terms. He felt no triumph, only a cold, quiet resignation. A small article in the local paper, buried on page B6, reported on Larry's arrest for fraud. Petty schemes, bad checks, unpaid debts. It was a final public humiliation for Brenda, the last thread of her carefully constructed illusion unraveling for all to see. The moral complexities of the situation weighed heavily on Dale. Seeing the pain in his children's eyes, their confusion and their renewed loyalty to him, made his own feelings, the satisfaction, the lingering hurt, feel complicated and messy. There was no clean resolution, only the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. Larry's legal troubles intensify, culminating in a public trial and conviction for embezzlement. Brenda, though not directly charged, faces severe public humiliation, leading to the loss of her job and reputation. Homeless and desperate, Brenda contacts Jenny and Mark, her voice fragile, appealing for help. Jenny and Mark, now established professionals, approach Dale with their mother's dire situation. Mark acknowledges Brenda's past mistakes but emphasizes her enduring role as their mother. Dale, despite lingering bitterness, feels a sense of responsibility, primarily for the sake of his children. He reluctantly agrees to provide Brenda shelter in a small, empty apartment he owns, under unspoken conditions. Brenda moves in, a mere shadow of her former self, humbled and stripped of her pride. The atmosphere between Dale and Brenda is thick with unspoken words, a tangible tension from their shared, painful history. Brenda attempts to apologize to Dale, but the weight of her actions prevents her from articulating it. Dale, while offering shelter, maintains a careful emotional distance, his scars from her betrayal still raw. The town observes Brenda's dramatic fall and Dale's surprising quiet act of charity, fueling gossip. Jenny and Mark reluctantly serve as mediators, attempting to cultivate a fragile peace between their parents. The old family house sold years ago becomes a haunting memory, symbolizing irreversible loss. Larry's legal troubles escalated. The initial fraud charges gave way to accusations of embezzlement, larger sums, more intricate deceptions. The ensuing public trial became a local sensation. The details splashed across the front page of the town paper. Larry was eventually convicted, sent away to a state penitentiary, his name synonymous with ruin. Brenda, though not charged as an accomplice, faced immense public shame. The whispers turned to outright commentary. Her professional reputation, once spotless, was irrevocably tarnished. She lost her job at the accounting firm, a dismissal quietly handled but widely known. Without income, without Larry, and with the foreclosure complete, Brenda found herself homeless, utterly adrift. She called Jenny first, then Mark, her voice fragile, a mere wisp of its former strength. There was nowhere else to go. She asked for help, not with the bravado she once possessed, but with a raw, desperate humility. Jenny, now a successful engineer, and Mark, working steadily in IT, approached Dale. They sat across from him at his kitchen table, presenting their mother's desperate situation. "She's got nothing, Dad," Jenny said, her voice quiet but firm. "Absolutely nothing." Mark added, "She messed bad, Dad, no doubt about it, but she's still our mom." He looked torn, the anger he once held tempered by a deep, filial obligation. He watched Dale, searching for a sign, a flicker of compassion. Dale sat for a long time, sipping his coffee, looking out the window at the familiar prairie landscape. Despite the years of bitterness, the deep-seated hurt, he felt a stirring of responsibility, mostly for his children's sake. He saw their genuine anguish, their conflicting loyalties. He couldn't let their mother be cast out completely. He had a small, vacant apartment above his garage, a storage space mostly. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. He reluctantly agreed. "She can stay there," he said, his voice flat. "But that's it." Strict, unspoken terms hung in the air. No expectations, no demands, just a roof over her head. He wouldn't forget, couldn't forget, but he also couldn't deny the basic human needs staring him in the face. Brenda moved in a week later. She was a shadow of her former self, smaller, quieter, her movements tentative. She didn't try to make conversation, only offered a murmured thank you that was barely audible. Humbled and broken, her pride, the weapon she had once wielded so effectively, was long gone. The air between Dale and Brenda was thick with unspoken words, a palpable tension of shared, painful history. Every glance, every accidental proximity in the driveway was laden with years of betrayal, accusation, and regret. The past hovered between them, an invisible, suffocating presence. Brenda tried to apologize to Dale once, a few weeks after moving in. She caught him as he was heading into his garage. "Dale," she started, her voice hoarse, I, I'm so sorry for everything." But the words caught in her throat. The weight of her actions, the sheer magnitude of the destruction she had caused, was too heavy to articulate, too vast to contain in a simple apology. She just stood there, her eyes downcast. Dale simply nodded, a tight, unreadable expression on his face. He didn't speak. He offered her shelter, a quiet act of charity, but he maintained a careful emotional distance. The scars of her betrayal were still fresh, still tender, beneath the surface of his outward calm. The town watched. The gossip mill churned with renewed vigor, now dissecting Brenda's spectacular fall from grace and Dale's unexpected, quiet act of charity. Opinions were divided, some admiring his generosity, others condemning her for accepting it. Jenny and Mark, caught in the middle, acted as reluctant mediators, trying to foster a fragile peace, a quiet truce. They would bring Brenda groceries, check in on her, but always with one eye on Dale, trying to navigate the delicate balance of their parents' fractured relationship. The old house, sold years ago to a young family with bright, boisterous children, became a phantom in their collective memory, a symbol of what was lost, what could never be regained, a stark reminder of the choices that had unmade their lives. Brenda slowly begins rebuilding her life, securing a modest job in a neighboring town. She dedicates herself to gradually regaining the trust and affection of Jenny and Mark. The small apartment becomes a quiet place for the children to reconnect with their mother. Dale, witnessing Brenda's genuine remorse and persistent efforts, experiences a subtle softening in his stern resolve. One evening after a family dinner, Dale and Brenda have a calm, unexpected conversation about their shared past, free of anger. Brenda whispers, "I ruined everything, didn't I, Dale?" Finally acknowledging her long-avoided truth. Dale offers no forgiveness, but quietly acknowledges her pain, stating, "You made your choices, Brenda. We all live with them." Jenny and Mark excel in their careers, building successful lives and stable relationships. They introduce their partners at family gatherings, gradually adding new dimensions to their repaired family structure. Dale finds quiet companionship with a kind woman but chooses not to remarry. Brenda, though alone, achieves a hard-won peace in her solitude and rekindled relationships with her children. The children, though now mature, understand that while complete forgiveness may not be possible, deep acceptance is. The painful past transforms into a quiet, cautionary tale about the fragility of trust and life's true cost. At a holiday dinner, Dale and Brenda exchange a knowing glance, a silent acknowledgement of their irrevocably changed lives. Brenda slowly began to piece her life back together, one small, tentative step at a time. Through a connection in a neighboring town, she found a modest accounting job, the kind that didn't ask too many questions about her past. She worked hard, kept to herself, and saved what little she could. Her dedication shifted from seeking external validation to earning back the trust and affection of Jenny and Mark. She listened more, offered less advice, and accepted their hesitant re-engagement without expectation. The small apartment above Dale's garage became a quiet haven, a neutral ground where Jenny and Mark could visit their mother, where a fragile thread of connection slowly, carefully, reformed. Dale observed Brenda's genuine remorse, her tireless efforts to rebuild. He saw the quiet dignity with which she accepted her lot, the way she no longer blamed others but simply put her head down and worked. A slight, almost imperceptible softening occurred in his rigid stance. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but a grudging respect for her perseverance. One evening after a rare family dinner at Dale's small house, Jenny and Mark had cooked. Brenda lingered after the children left. The silence was thick, but for once, not suffocating. Dale poured them each a cup of coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, the only light from the dim overhead fixture. They shared a quiet, unexpected conversation about their past, devoid of anger, just weary reflection. "I ruined everything, didn't I, Dale?" Brenda whispered, her voice barely audible, finally speaking the truth she'd avoided for so long, the words hanging heavy in the still air. She looked at him, her eyes searching, not for absolution, but for acknowledgement. Dale took a slow sip of his coffee. He offered no forgiveness, no easy absolution, but he offered a quiet acknowledgement of her pain. "You made your choices, Brenda," he said, his voice even, devoid of triumph or bitterness. "We all live with them." It was not a grand gesture, but it was honest, a stark reality spoken between two people who had once shared everything. Jenny and Mark thrived in their careers. Jenny, with her engineering degree, found work at a prominent firm. Mark, with his IT skills, quickly advanced in his company. They built their own lives, finding success in stable partnerships. They started bringing their partners to family gatherings, slowly weaving new, healthy threads into the damaged fabric of their family. The laughter was more genuine now, less forced. Dale, too, found a quiet companionship in a kind, soft-spoken woman he met at a local historical society meeting. Her name was Martha. They enjoyed quiet evenings, long walks, and shared stories, but he never saw fit to remarry. The idea of marriage, of that kind of commitment, felt too exposed, too vulnerable after Brenda. Martha understood. Brenda, though alone in her small apartment, found a measure of hard-won peace in her solitude and the renewed bonds with her children. It was a different kind of life than the one she had envisioned, or the one she had recklessly thrown away. But it was hers, and it was real. The children, now fully mature, understood that while absolute forgiveness for their mother's actions might remain elusive, a profound acceptance was possible. They understood that people made mistakes, sometimes catastrophic ones, and that life had a way of balancing the scales, not always gently. The painful past morphed into a quiet cautionary tale in their collective consciousness, a deep-seated lesson in trust fragility and life's true costs. It was a scar, but one that had healed, leaving behind wisdom. At a holiday dinner years after Brenda moved into the apartment, Dale caught her eye across the table. Jenny and Mark were laughing with their partners, the room filled with a comfortable warmth. Brenda offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. Dale returned it. It was a shared glance, a silent understanding of a life irrevocably changed, yet perhaps not entirely lost. Years turn into decades, with Jenny and Mark establishing their own families and bringing grandchildren into the fold. Brenda settles into a modest life, finding a quiet acceptance of her past choices and their consequences. Dale remains the steadfast patriarch, his old wounds now scars, a respected figure who endured much. He often reflects on his long, winding journey, from the initial betrayal to a fragile, hard-earned peace. His children, now adults, understand that while full forgiveness might be elusive, a profound, enduring family love is possible. Brenda's pay the price wasn't a sudden event, but a slow, continuous erosion of her former life and dreams. Dale realizes his own form of retribution stemmed not from his actions, but directly from Brenda's choices and their inevitable consequences. He tells Jenny, it wasn't about getting even. It was about living honestly, about finding peace. A milestone family gathering brings all generations together, quietly acknowledging their shared, tumultuous history. Brenda, observing Dale with his great-grandchildren, feels deep, silent regret, alongside profound gratitude for a second chance at that family. Dale, seeing his thriving family, understands that his ultimate victory was in rebuilding his own life and securing their enduring love. The story concludes with a reflection on Midwestern resilience, enduring hardship, learning from mistakes, and carrying on. The bitter memory of infidelity lingers, but it is tempered by the profound strength of a family that ultimately prevailed. Life in the Midwest continues, where actions have consequences, and time reconfigures everything. Years turned into decades, as they always do, blurring the sharp edges of memory. Jenny and Mark established their own families, bringing grandchildren, Dale's grandchildren, then great-grandchildren, into the fold. Jenny, now a senior engineer, lived a few hours away, her house often filled with the laughter of her two boys and her husband, another engineer she'd met at work. Mark, stable in his IT career, built a quiet life nearby, his daughter often visiting Dale for stories. Brenda continued to live a modest life in the apartment above Dale's garage. She had found a quiet, almost serene acceptance of her consequences and the path she had walked. She worked her job in the neighboring town, volunteered at the local library, and cherished the slow, careful rebuilding of her relationship with her children and grandchildren. Her pride, once a towering shield, was gone, replaced by a humble gratitude. Dale remained the steadfast patriarch, his wounds healed into scars, a visible map of resilience. He was a respected figure in the town, a man who had endured and, in his quiet way, prevailed. His hair turned white, his steps grew slower, but his gaze remained steady, his presence a solid anchor for his family. He often reflected on the long, winding journey, from the shattering betrayal of that Friday night to a fragile, hard-earned peace that had settled over his life. He saw the arc of it, the slow grinding of time, the unexpected turns. His children, now elders themselves, understood that while full forgiveness might never arrive, a profound, enduring family love could. They saw the complexities, the human failings, and the quiet courage it took to move forward. They learned that love wasn't always clean or easy, but it could be persistent even after being broken. Brenda's pay the price wasn't a sudden, dramatic downfall, a singular moment of catastrophe. Instead, it was a slow, continuous erosion, the loss of her home, her reputation, her financial security, and the quiet, agonizing realization of what she had traded for a fleeting fantasy. It was the daily grind of rebuilding, the constant absence of the life she once had, and the dreams she'd chased so recklessly. Dale realized his own form of retribution came not from his actions, but directly from Brenda's choices and their natural, inevitable unfolding. He hadn't sought revenge. Life had simply shown its hand. It wasn't about getting even, Jenny, he told his daughter over a quiet cup of coffee one Sunday afternoon. It was about living honestly, about finding peace for me, for you kids. A milestone family gathering, Dale's 90th birthday. All generations were present, filling the small community hall with noise and warmth. Jenny and Mark stood proudly with their spouses, their children and grandchildren clustered around them. Brenda was there too, sitting quietly at a table near the back observing. There was a quiet acknowledgement of their shared, tumultuous history in the air, a silent understanding that hung between the laughter and the clinking of glasses. Brenda, watching Dale surrounded by his great-grandchildren, their tiny hands clutching his, felt a deep, silent regret for her past. She saw the full, vibrant life he had built, a testament to his strength. But she also felt a profound gratitude for this fragile second chance at family, for being allowed a small place within its enduring circle. Dale, observing his thriving children and grandchildren, understood that the ultimate victory was not over Brenda, not in any form of spite or triumph. It was in rebuilding his own life, brick by painstaking brick, in securing his family's enduring love. Their happiness, their stability, was his legacy. The story concluded with a reflection on Midwestern resilience, people enduring hardship, learning from mistakes, and finding a way to carry on, come what may. The bitter taste of infidelity lingered in the back of their collective memory, a permanent cautionary note, but it was tempered by the deep, profound strength of a family that ultimately prevailed. Life in the Midwest continued, harsh and beautiful, where actions always had consequences, and time, though it never erased, slowly reconfigured everything.